When you picture the Gilded Age, you probably think of fancy top hats, extravagant balls, and serious-faced industrialists. Well, you can forget all that. The reality was a full-blown carnival of insanity, fueled by obscene money, zero regulation, and a level of shamelessness that is almost admirable. We're about to explore an America where politicians invited goats to parties, where your pants could literally explode, and where conmen sold the Statue of Liberty on a weekly basis. This is the wild, weird, and truly dumb side of American history. 1. The goat on the guest list. So you're a governor during the Gilded Age and you need to throw a fancy state dinner. You've got senators, judges, and all the important stuffy shirts on the invite list. But you look at the list and think, this is boring. It needs more chaos. It needs more goat. And that's exactly what one governor did. He formally invited his pet goat to a black tie event, complete with a seat at the main table. The goat wasn't just there for moral support. It was a full-fledged guest, probably critiquing the wine selection and chewing on the corner of the tablecloth, while a congressman tried to discuss tax policy. This was the ultimate power move, a way of telling the elite that you play by your own farm animal inclusive rules. 2. The champagne bathtub. Baptism. In the Gilded Age, being ridiculously wealthy meant finding new and exciting ways to burn through money. And James Bud Bull looked at the ancient tradition of baptism and decided it needed a serious, high-end upgrade. Holy water? Please, that's for peasants. For his child's grand debut into the world, he filled an entire bathtub with France's most expensive Veuve Clicquot champagne and dunked the baby right in. You have to imagine the priest just standing there, completely bewildered, while this infant gets its first taste of high society, literally. It was the kind of obscene extravagance that screamed, "My child's first bath costs more than your entire house," and it perfectly captured the era's tone-deaf absurdity. 3. The anti-masturbation medical madness. The Gilded Age was completely terrified of the act of, let's say, solo handshakes. Doctors and moralists were convinced it would make your teeth fall out and your brain turn to soup. So, what was their genius solution? They invented a whole catalog of the most absurdly terrible gadgets imaginable. We're talking about things like spiked rings that served as a very painful do not touch sign, and even genital cages designed to make a man's private life a public failure. It was an entire industry built on the idea that the best way to promote good moral character was through poorly designed, medieval-looking hardware. You have to wonder how many inventors pitched these things with a straight face. 4. The electric pants. Panic. The Gilded Age was the golden era of snake oil salesmen, and their masterpiece might just be electric pants. The sales pitch was simple. Are you feeling a little low on energy? Just slip on these special trousers, and a gentle current will restore your manly vigor. The reality, however, was less gentle hum and more catastrophic electrical fire in your crotch. These things were built with all the engineering prowess of a squirrel in a hardware store. Wires would cross, batteries would leak, and men hoping for a little boost would instead get a violent jolt that would singe their leg hair and make them question all their life choices. It turns out, running electricity that close to the family jewels is, scientifically speaking, a bad idea. 5. The ghost voters of Pennsylvania. Voter fraud in the Gilded Age wasn't just a crime, it was a creative endeavor. The political bosses in Pennsylvania weren't content with just stuffing ballot boxes. They decided to enlist the most reliable voting bloc they could find: the dead. Their system was so brazenly corrupt that in one election a single deceased man was recorded as having voted in 3 separate districts. You have to picture this ghost, a true patriot, floating from town to town to make sure his voice was heard again and again. It was less about democracy and more about demonstrating that not even death could stop you from supporting the party machine, especially when the machine was the one marking your ballot. 6. The exploding toilet patent feud. You might think the world of plumbing innovation is a peaceful one, but in the Gilded Age, it was a war zone. 2 inventors were locked in a bitter feud over who had designed the superior flushing toilet. and one of them decided to settle it with a bang. During a major trade fair, as one inventor was proudly demonstrating his porcelain masterpiece to a crowd, his rival's sabotage kicked in. With a mighty pull of the chain, the toilet didn't just flush. It detonated, sending a geyser of water and ceramic shrapnel flying across the convention floor. It was the most dramatic product failure in history, and it proved that even in the business of waste management, a little industrial espionage can make a huge splash. 7. The Congressional Cigar Boat Orgy. The government built a sleek, experimental vessel and called it the cigar boat. Its official purpose was probably something noble about naval innovation. Its unofficial purpose? It was Congress's personal party barge. Washington's most powerful men would use the taxpayer-funded yacht to get away from it all, hosting wild, booze-fueled benders on the water with lobbyists and ladies of the night. It was the perfect arrangement, a floating den of sin where laws were influenced, deals were made, and absolutely no serious government work was ever done. It was a beautiful, shameless example of mixing business with pleasure, where business was running the country, and pleasure was everything your mother told you not to do. 8. The man who sold the Statue of Liberty twice. You have to have a special kind of confidence to try and sell a 305-foot copper statue that you definitely do not own. George C. Parker had that confidence in spades. This legendary con artist made a career out of selling New York's landmarks to gullible tourists. His favorite target was the Brooklyn Bridge, which he sold over and over to people who thought they could set up a toll. But his crowning achievement was convincing not one, but two different wealthy suckers to buy the Statue of Liberty. He would even print up official-looking fake deeds. You have to admire the sheer audacity of a man who looked at a national monument and saw a fixer-upper with great harbor views. 9. The Ice Cream Riot. In the Gilded Age, even the children were intense. The Great New York Ice Cream Riot of 1885 wasn't a metaphor. It was a literal street battle fought over frozen dessert. When a popular street vendor ran out of the kids' favorite flavor, the youngsters didn't just get disappointed, they got organized. They formed a tiny, sugar-fueled mob and unleashed chaos, overturning carts and demanding frozen justice. It got so out of hand that the police had to be called in to disperse a crowd of angry 7-year-olds. You have to imagine a giant, mustachioed cop trying to de-escalate a situation with a kid who is just absolutely furious that he has to settle for vanilla. It was a true crisis of public order, caused entirely by a failure in dairy supply chain management. 10. The Million-Dollar Clock War. Petty family feuds are one thing, but Gilded Age millionaires turned them into an art form. When two wealthy brothers had a falling out, one decided to enact a form of revenge that was as expensive as it was annoying. He built a gigantic, monstrous clock tower on his property, right next to his brother's house. But this wasn't some charming Big Ben. This clock was specifically designed to be the most obnoxious neighbor in history, loudly chiming not every hour but every 8 minutes, all day and all night. It was a multi-million-dollar instrument of psychological torment, a constant clanging reminder that your brother was a jerk with way too much time and money on his hands. 11. The outrageous Bradley Martin Ball of 1897. There's being rich, and then there's being so rich you accidentally start a class war with a party. In the middle of a brutal economic depression, the Bradley Martin family decided the best way to cheer everyone up was to throw a costume ball that cost the modern equivalent of millions. While people were lining up for bread, these folks were dressing up as historical royalty, with one guest wearing a full suit of gold-inlaid armor worth a fortune. The public reaction was, to put it mildly, not positive. The backlash was so intense that the family, who just wanted to have a nice little get-together in their palace, ended up fleeing the country to escape the tidal wave of bad press. 12. Snake oil and coca wine. America's lethal beauty craze. The Gilded Age beauty industry was basically a science experiment where your face was the laboratory. Women chasing the ideal of pale skin and rosy cheeks would slather on creams and powders without a second thought. The only problem was that these products were a witch's brew of questionable ingredients. Want that fashionable pale complexion? Here's a lovely face powder made with a healthy dose of lead and arsenic. Need a little pick-me-up? Try this popular coca wine, which was exactly what it sounds like. Wine infused with cocaine. It was a time when a woman's makeup bag had a more dangerous chemical profile than a mad scientist's lab. 13. The swill milk. Scandal. Now, some stories from this era aren't funny, they're just horrifying. And this is one of them. In the crowded cities, some dairies decided to cut costs in the most disgusting way imaginable. They kept their cows in filthy urban pens and fed them swill, the hot, steaming, fermented mash left over from nearby whiskey distilleries. The milk that came from these sick animals was thin, bluish, and barely nutritious. To make it look like real milk, they would often add things like chalk, plaster, and even molasses, and then dilute it all with contaminated water from local rivers. This toxic cocktail was sold to the poorest families, leading to the deaths of thousands upon thousands of infants. It was a truly dark chapter showing that the era's greed had no limits. 14. The pure food panic. Sawdust bread and chalk milk. After the horrors of swill milk, people started wondering what else was hiding in their food. The answer was a lot of stuff that wasn't food. The Gilded Age was the Wild West of groceries. Bakers trying to save a buck would bulk up their bread with sawdust to give it more body. Dairymen would whiten their milk with a splash of chalk. That bright red cinnamon you bought? It probably got its color from a bit of ground-up brick dust. And those vibrant green pickles? They were often made extra green with a dash of copper sulfate. It was less like a trip to the market and more like a trip to a hardware store that you could eat. 15. The dangers of patent medicines. If you had a cough, a headache, or just a general case of being alive in the 19th century, there was a patent medicine for you. These bottles of miracle elixir and restorative tonic promised to cure everything. What they actually did was get you incredibly wasted. The secret ingredient was usually a massive dose of alcohol, opium, morphine, or even cocaine. You'd give your fussy baby a few drops of Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup to calm them down, and it worked wonders, mostly because you had just given your infant a shot of morphine. People weren't being cured, they were just becoming accidental drug addicts with the full endorsement of modern science. 16. The panic of the corset. The ultimate fashion statement for a Gilded Age woman was a waist so tiny it looked like a cartoon. The tool for this magical transformation was the corset, a device that was essentially a full torso cage made of whalebone and fabric. Women would lace themselves in so tightly that their internal organs would literally get rearranged. Your lungs would be squished, your liver would be shoved downwards, and your stomach would wonder what it ever did to deserve this. When doctors finally started pointing out that maybe, just maybe, systematically crushing your own rib cage wasn't healthy, it created a scandal. For many, the horror of a 2-inch wider waist was far scarier than the minor inconvenience of fainting from lack of oxygen. Now 17. The bicycle face. Hoax. With the invention of the bicycle, women discovered a thrilling new form of freedom. And a certain type of man absolutely hated it. So, what did they do? They invented a fake medical condition called bicycle face. According to very serious doctors with very serious beards, if a woman rode a bicycle too much, her face would become permanently frozen in a strained, haggard expression. They described it with symptoms like a clenched jaw and bulging eyes, basically turning a woman's look of happy concentration into a grotesque medical diagnosis. This wasn't science. It was a desperate attempt to convince women that having fun on 2 wheels would make them ugly. It's one of the dumbest moral panics in history, and it hilariously failed. 18. The credit mobilier. Scandal. The Gilded Age was full of brilliant get-rich-quick schemes, but this one was a masterpiece of simplicity. A group of powerful congressmen wanted to build the Transcontinental Railroad with government money. So they came up with an idea. What if we hire a construction company to do the work, and we also happen to secretly own that company? So they formed a fake firm called Credit Mobilier and awarded it massive, wildly overpriced contracts. They were essentially taking money from the government's pocket and putting it right back into their own. To keep everyone quiet, they would hand out shares in their fake company to other politicians. It was the perfect scam, a self-funding circle of corruption paid for by the American taxpayer. 19. The whiskey ring. When you hear whiskey ring, you might picture a sophisticated secret society. The reality was much dumber. It was a group of distillers and high-level government officials, many of them close friends of President Ulysses S. Grant, who realized that paying taxes on whiskey was for chumps. So they just didn't. They bribed Treasury agents to look the other way while they sold millions of gallons of untaxed liquor. The scheme was so widespread and involved so many of the president's pals that when it was finally exposed, it made the administration look like a fraternity house trying to hide its slush fund. It was a simple, boozy conspiracy that siphoned away millions from the Treasury, all for the love of cheap whiskey and easy money. 20. The Star Route Postal Frauds. In the Gilded Age, the U.S. Postal Service was a goldmine for creative corruption. The government paid private contractors to deliver mail on star routes to remote areas in the West. Some clever officials and their business partners realized the government wasn't actually checking if these places existed, so they just started making them up. They would create fictional towns, draw fake mail routes between them on a map, and then bill the government a fortune for the difficult and dangerous delivery. You have to imagine a postal inspector looking at a budget request for a route from Whiskey Creek to Big Rock Canyon, neither of which were real, and just shrugging and signing the check. 21. Jay Gould's Black Friday. Jay Gould was a financial speculator who looked at the U.S. economy and saw it as his personal playground. In 1869, he came up with a plan that was as simple as it was insane. He was going to buy all the gold. He and his partner cornered the market, buying up so much gold that its price skyrocketed, hoping the government wouldn't intervene. For a brief, shining moment, he was the king of the world. Then, President Grant realized what was happening and ordered the Treasury to sell its gold, flooding the market. The price crashed instantly, the stock market went into a nosedive, and thousands of people were ruined. Jay Gould nearly broke America, all because he woke up one morning and decided to try and own a color. 22. Boss Tweed's Reign of Corruption. William. Boss Tweed didn't just steal from New York City. He treated its budget like his personal piggy bank, and he smashed it with a sledgehammer. As the head of the Tammany Hall political machine, he perfected the art of the overcharge. The city needed a new courthouse. A normal contractor might quote $250,000. Tweed's guys quoted $13 million. He would approve bills for things like repairing fixtures that cost more than the building itself. His plasterer supposedly made millions on a single job. It wasn't just corruption. It was a comedy of numbers so absurdly inflated that you almost have to respect the sheer guts it took to submit the invoices with a straight face. 23. The Dollar Princesses. Marriage market. In the Gilded Age, if you were a new money American millionaire, you had a problem. All the cash in the world couldn't buy you a fancy old world title. But you did have a daughter. Meanwhile, over in Europe, there were dukes and earls with titles going back centuries, but their castles were crumbling and they were flat broke. So a booming market was born. American families would essentially sell their daughters to these broke aristocrats. It was a straight-up trade, a massive dowry in exchange for a title. These dollar princesses were shipped overseas in a business transaction that had all the romance of a corporate merger, proving that in the Gilded Age, even matrimony could be bought and sold. 24. The Gilded Age. Foodie craze. The super rich of the Gilded Age didn't eat food. They consumed status symbols. Their banquets were less about flavor and more about finding the most bizarre, ridiculously expensive things to put on a plate. They would dine on platters of songbird tongues, jellied eels, and stewed terrapin. The centerpiece of a truly great party might be a whole roasted peacock, reassembled with its feathers to look like it was still alive, and very disappointed in your choice of necktie. This wasn't about enjoying a meal. It was about serving something so weird and decadent that your guests would know without a doubt that you were richer and therefore better than them. It was a culinary arms race of pure absurdity. 25. Victoria Woodhull, the satanic candidate. In an era when most women couldn't even vote, Victoria Woodhull decided she was going to run for president. This alone was enough to make society's monocles pop out. But she didn't stop there. She was a spiritualist, a stockbroker, and a vocal supporter of free love, which in the 1870s was basically the same as announcing you were opening a portal to heck. The press had a field day, calling her Mrs. Satan and portraying her as a devilish temptress sent to destroy the American family. Her response? She exposed a massive sex scandal involving America's most famous preacher. Naturally, she was the one who got thrown in jail for it. You have to be a special kind of awesome to get arrested for being too cool for your time. 26. The Tenderloin District. Legalized sin. Most cities try to hide their seedy underbelly. Gilded Age, New York decided to give it a name, a zip code, and its own unofficial theme song. The Tenderloin District was an entire neighborhood dedicated to every vice you could imagine. Gambling dens, brothels, and opium parlors, all operating in the open. It wasn't just tolerated, it was a well-oiled machine run in partnership with the police. A cop famously said he was assigned to the district because he could finally afford tenderloin steak for dinner, and the name stuck. It was a bizarre social experiment in containing chaos, creating a city-sanctioned playground for corruption and bad decisions. And it was probably the most honest political system in the country. 27. Cassie Chadwick's Carnegie Con. Some con artists have a clever gimmick. Cassie Chadwick had a ridiculously simple one. She told people she was the secret, illegitimate daughter of steel tycoon Andrew Carnegie, and for some reason everyone just believed her. She never offered any proof. She just acted the part, sighing about the burdens of being a secret heiress. On the strength of this one lie, she managed to borrow millions of dollars from banks, who were all too eager to lend to Carnegie's daughter. She lived a life of insane luxury for years, all funded by a rumor she started herself. It's a beautiful story that proves in the Gilded Age, having a famous fake dad was just as good as having a real one. 28. The Watered Stock. Scam. The robber barons of the Gilded Age were masters of making money from nothing, and their favorite magic trick was watered stock. The scam was simple. You'd start a railroad company and issue, say, $10 million in stock certificates. Then, you'd just go to the printing press and run off another $10 million worth, doubling the shares without adding a single new locomotive or inch of track. It was the corporate equivalent of photocopying money. They named it after the old rancher's trick of forcing cattle to drink a ton of water right before selling them to make them weigh more. In both cases, you were selling something that was mostly just hot air and a little bit of fraud. 29. The Vanderbilt Family Feud. When the mega-millionaire Cornelius Vanderbilt got old, his kids weren't concerned about his health. They were concerned he might give all their inheritance to his new, young wife. So they did what any loving family would do. They took him to court and tried to have him declared legally insane. The ensuing trial was a public spectacle, a parade of family members taking the stand to testify that dear old dad was completely bonkers. They claimed he consulted spirit mediums and was obsessed with bizarre health fads. It was a dirty public battle where a family tore itself apart, not for love or honor, but just to make sure they got their piece of the biggest pile of cash in America. 30. The Lobster Salad. Scandal. In the Gilded Age, even lunch could become a symbol of epic corruption. A group of 12 city officials in New York went out for a business lunch and managed to rack up a bill so astronomically huge it became a citywide scandal. The main offense? Lobster salad and champagne. The final tally for this single meal cost the city's taxpayers more than the annual budget for an entire school district. The public was furious. You have to imagine a teacher trying to get funding for books while a city alderman is busy ordering a third helping of lobster because, hey, it's not his money. It perfectly captured the era's attitude. The people in charge were literally eating the public's future, one decadent bite at a time. 31. The backroom deal of 1877. The presidential election of 1876 was a complete mess. The results were so close and so disputed that America was on the brink of another civil war. So, how did they solve this democratic crisis? A bunch of politicians went into a smoky backroom and made a deal. They agreed to give the presidency to the Republican Rutherford B. Hayes on one condition. The federal government had to pull its troops out of the South, effectively ending Reconstruction and abandoning African Americans to the mercy of their former oppressors. The presidency was decided not by voters, but by a handful of guys cutting a deal that would trade the White House for the civil rights of millions. It was a cynical, ugly moment that shaped the next century of American history. 32. The San Francisco graft trials. San Francisco during the Gilded Age wasn't just corrupt, it was professionally corrupt. The mayor and the entire city board of supervisors operated a system of bribery so organized it was almost impressive. They had a literal menu of prices for illegal services. Want to operate a streetcar company? That'll be a hefty payment. Want your brothel to avoid police raids? There's a fee for that. No business was too big or too small to be shaken down. It was a citywide protection racket run by the people who were elected to protect the city. When the whole scheme was finally exposed, the trials became a national sensation, revealing a level of systematic graft that was shocking even by Gilded Age standards. 33. The Louisiana Lottery Company. This wasn't your grandma's weekly bingo game. This was a lottery so big and powerful it basically owned an entire state. The Louisiana Lottery Company was a private corporation that operated a national gambling racket with the full blessing of Louisiana's politicians, who were, of course, getting enormous kickbacks. It was advertised as a way to raise money for charity, which was a bit like saying a wolf guards a hen house for the hen's benefit. This company was a mail-order machine for crushing dreams, raking in a fortune from people all over the country while paying out almost nothing. It became more powerful than the state government itself, a multi-million-dollar private kingdom built on bad math and wishful thinking. 34. The Mulligan Letters. Scandal, there's a golden rule in politics: if you're going to do something shady, don't write it down. Influential politician James G. Blaine learned this the hard way. A series of his personal letters, which basically laid out his corrupt dealings with railroad companies, fell into the hands of his enemies. The best part is one letter literally ended with the postscript, "Kindly burn this letter." They did not, in fact, burn the letter. The scandal that followed was a slow-motion political train wreck. Blaine's career was permanently hobbled, not by a grand conspiracy, but by his own terrible habit of creating a detailed, written record of his own corruption. It was a self-inflicted wound delivered by ink and paper. 35. The Beecher-Tilton sex scandal. Henry Ward. Beecher was the most famous preacher in America, a moral titan who was basically the 19th century equivalent of a rock star. So it was a bit of a shock when he was publicly accused of having an affair with the wife of his best friend and protege. What followed wasn't just a trial, it was the Gilded Age's Super Bowl of gossip. Newspapers published every steamy, speculative detail. It was a national soap opera that divided the country. Was the nation's spiritual guide a secret sinner? The whole affair was a magnificent, messy explosion of hypocrisy and drama that proved that even the most pious figures can have very, very human problems. 36. The Battle of the Operas. In Gilded Age New York, social warfare was fought with bricks and mortar. The old money, Astor family, and their snooty friends controlled the city's premier opera house and refused to let the new money Vanderbilts buy a box seat. It was the ultimate high society snub. So, what did the Vanderbilts do? They didn't just get mad. They got even in the most ridiculously extravagant way possible. They pooled their money with other new money millionaires and built their own opera house, the Metropolitan Opera, right down the street. It was bigger, grander, and way more expensive. It was an architectural declaration of war, a multi-million-dollar monument to the fact that if you can't join the club, you can always just build a better one. 37. The Erie Ring. The fight for the Erie Railroad wasn't a business negotiation. It was a Looney Tunes cartoon brought to life by three of the most shameless men in America. Financiers Jay Gould and Jim Fisk were battling the titan Cornelius Vanderbilt for control. When Vanderbilt started buying up their stock, Gould and Fisk just went into a backroom and started printing more of it, literally flooding the market with fake shares. When the law tried to stop them, they bribed every judge and politician they could find. The whole affair was a chaotic circus of illegal stock printing, comical getaways, and political bribery that turned the financial world into a slapstick comedy. It was corporate rating as performance art. 38. The buying of a Senate seat. William A. Clark, a copper tycoon from Montana, decided he wanted to be a U.S. senator. So he went about it the same way he'd buy a new horse. He pulled out a giant bag of cash. He so openly and flagrantly bribed the members of the Montana state legislature to vote for him that it wasn't even a secret. It was just how he did business. But he was a little too honest about his dishonesty. When he showed up in Washington, the U.S. Senate took one look at his methods and refused to let him take his seat. He had managed the impossible. He was so corrupt that he shocked a room full of Gilded Age politicians. It was a rare case of a man being disqualified from a job for being too good at the interview process. 39. The bank collapse of Ferdinand Ward. Ferdinand Ward was a man so charming he could talk a bird out of a tree and then sell the tree back to the bird at a profit. Nicknamed the young Napoleon of finance, he partnered with President Grant's son and created what looked like a brilliant investment firm. He promised huge returns, and the elite of New York lined up to give him their money. The only problem was, his entire business was a phantom. He wasn't investing the money. He was just using new investors' cash to pay off the old ones. It was a classic pyramid scheme. When it inevitably collapsed, it wiped out the fortunes of countless wealthy families and very nearly bankrupted the former president himself, proving that a good smile can be the most dangerous weapon on Wall Street. 40. The Panic of 1893. The Gilded Age economy was built on a foundation of pure, uncut optimism and wildly speculative railroads. Companies were laying track to towns that didn't exist, all funded by mountains of debt and questionable stock. It was a giant nationwide game of Jenga played with banks and railroads. In 1893, someone finally pulled the wrong block. A major railroad went bankrupt, and the whole rickety structure came crashing down. Banks failed, businesses closed, and millions were thrown out of work. It was one of the worst depressions in American history, all because the so-called titans of industry had built a national economy that was as stable as a house of cards in a hurricane. 41. Alva Vanderbilt's defiant divorce. In the Gilded Age, a respectable woman did not divorce her husband. It was social suicide. But Alva Vanderbilt was not most women. After discovering her mega-rich husband William was cheating on her, she didn't just get sad, she got strategic. She publicly filed for divorce on grounds of adultery, a move so scandalous it was like dropping a bomb in the middle of a tea party. She secured a massive settlement, equivalent to over $100 million today, and then immediately used her newfound freedom and fortune to force her daughter into a marriage with an English duke. She weaponized divorce, turning a personal scandal into a power play that secured her family's social status for a generation. It was a masterclass in Gilded Age chess. 42. The Russell Sage Human Shield Case. Russell Sage was one of the richest and most disliked men in America, a ruthless financier known for being incredibly cheap. One day, a man walked into his office with a briefcase full of dynamite and a demand for over $1 million. As the man got agitated, Sage did what any quick-thinking captain of industry would do. He grabbed a nearby clerk and gently positioned the poor fellow between himself and the bomb. When the dynamite went off, the clerk was severely injured, while Sage escaped with minor scrapes. The clerk later sued him, but Sage fought it for years. It was a shocking, almost cartoonishly evil act of self-preservation that perfectly summed up the era's attitude toward the little guy. 43. The Company Town Trap. For many workers in the Gilded Age, the American dream looked a lot like a trap. Industrialists like George Pullman didn't just build factories, they built entire towns around them. You'd work in the company's factory, live in a company-owned house, and buy your groceries from the company store using company-issued currency or scrip. It sounded utopian, but it was a system of total control. The company could raise your rent and the price of bread whenever it wanted. You were essentially a modern-day serf, working to pay off debts to the same man who signed your paychecks. It was a closed loop of economic servitude, brilliantly disguised as progress. 44. The notorious Maury Letter. Forgery. In the nail-bitingly close presidential election of 1880, someone came up with a dirty trick that was almost too brilliant. A letter was leaked to the press, supposedly written by the Republican candidate, James A. Garfield. In it, Garfield appeared to support the right of businesses to import cheap Chinese labor, which was a massively unpopular position, especially in the key swing state of California. The letter was a complete and utter fake, a masterful piece of political forgery designed to sink his campaign at the last minute. It almost worked. The scandal exploded just days before the election, forcing Garfield's team into a frantic scramble to prove he wasn't who the letter claimed he was. It was a perfect example of Gilded Age fake news. So there you have it, a tour through an era fueled by unlimited cash and a complete absence of common sense. From ghost voters to weaponized clock towers, the Gilded Age proves that history's greatest moments are often its most idiotic. But this raises a serious question that I want you to battle out in the comments. Was this spectacular level of absurdity and corruption just a one-time fluke in American history, born from a unique moment of industrial chaos? Or was the Gilded Age simply the first draft, the beta test, for the kind of shamelessness and greed we still see today, just with better PR? If you enjoy history that feels more like a fever dream than a lecture, you know what to do. Give this video a like and subscribe for more dives into the historical madhouse.